Yeah.
But no, we're having fun at the moment. I mean, we just returned to Hannibal Digested, of course, which has been amazing fun. Oh my goodness, I love that show so much.
No, I need to catch up on your guys' stuff. I might even want to return to Hannibal at some point. It's been a few years, and I've watched it all the way through several times. But I think, as you guys have said on the podcasts that I've seen or heard of you, like, it is very rewatchable.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Honestly, it's a bit ridiculous, to be honest. I need to stay away from it, except for the purposes of the podcasts.
Yeah.
Because I have this awful habit of watching the episodes we're doing and then watching another two and another two and another two and another two, and before I know it, I've watched the whole thing again.
It's incredibly compulsive. Like, there are maybe weaker and stronger seasons, but they're not. There's no really genuinely weak season in my view.
No.
As a whole, it's I mean, even possibly my favorite series ever is Battlestar Galactica, and it does have some pretty weak mid-season stuff around the writers' strikes. I wouldn't say like there's any particular part of Hannibal I don't look forward to.
That's the problem, isn't it? It's one of those shows that I find anyway that it ruins me. It ruins me for most other things because I tend to feel that this is very like Hannibal but not as good. It's not as clever or as profound or as beautiful as Hannibal is.
I do find, like, because there are some of those shows that I really like. Justified is one I've been going back to, which is kind of topical because of Fallout and the acting in both of them. But like, there aren't many. Like, there are new series that I've watched and enjoy, Fallout being one. There aren't many that I could imagine like returning to in that way. Like, I think I probably won't like return to Fallout like multiple times. Like, I really did like it. I think it's a great series. I like the finale. But I haven't seen very much of the quality of Hannibal or Battlestar Galactica or Justified for quite a long time, which is a shame. But yeah, those series are all ones that I can just easily just dovetail into and lose myself for weeks if
absolutely. I mean, I love Fallout. I've got to say, I was so impressed by the reaction to it. I mean, like, I didn't see a bad report from anyone.
It's done really well. I mean, it's I think it's my only criticism of it, I think I mentioned on Facebook, is probably the Brotherhood of Steel, which isn't to say they're done badly. I just don't feel they have much gravity or depth, and they lack some of the dimensions that they have from the series from the games. I think in the games there's much more of a sense of decrepitude about them, I think, in the games that I quite enjoy. There's a real sense that, like, because they're so, I mean, they do have that religious aspect in the show, but they're so obscurantist and esoteric in the game.
Oh, in the game,
even most of them don't know what they're doing. Like,
absolutely, there are layers and layers and layers and layers of that organization, aren't there? They're very like Scientology or one of those cults that only allows you to know when you progress to a particular status. And also, I mean, in the games there are also multiple different sects and churches of the Brotherhood, all of which are in conflict with one another, consider one another to be heretical or blasphemous or whatever. That's kind of fun. I like that.
Yeah, that stuff is great. I mean, that's what I like about the Brotherhood from the games, that they're. I mean, I think it is something that the series managed to retain overall. It has a fantastic sense of comedy and satire.
Yes, yeah.
And that would have been, I mean, especially those last couple of episodes with the reveals are both like really poignant at points. I mean, I assume we can do spoilers on podcast.
Yes, absolutely. By the way, guys, we're going to assume anything we're talking about you've seen, so just be careful of that, okay?
It's I as you know, I have a long running indifference to spoilers
Yeah,
anyway.
likewise, and it gets me into trouble sometimes. I will be honest; it does get me into trouble. It has got me into trouble in the past.
Yes. Yeah, no, me too, definitely. I mean, even an essay I wrote against spoilers on my blog, I think, had probably more pushback than most of my political essays.
One that really made me laugh. I got a message from somebody recently because I was talking about Macbeth because I returned to Shakespeare recently, and someone sent me a message saying that I'd spoiled it. I was like, really?
That's really funny.
I spoiled Macbeth, did I? Wow.
I've been accused of spoiling. I remember when I was a kid, I spoiled Gandalf's death and resurrection for somebody, which I also thought was kind of absurd. And I think Romeo and Juliet, which I just
Oh,
I mean
really?
that's even more extreme than Macbeth because I think Romeo and Juliet is like so. Like, even if you don't know Shakespeare, you probably know.
You know Romeo and Juliet. You do know it in some shape or form.
Like, it's school play level.
Yeah. I mean, it's cartoons, it's comedies, it's everything, right? You have seen Romeo and Juliet somewhere.
Yeah. I also just don't buy that knowing the plot ahead actually damages a story. No. I just don't think that's how people...
It's never done so for me. For any work that I actually like that I've had quote unquote spoiled, it's never dampened my enjoyment of it one whit, not at all. And I do have a feeling that if that is the case, then it's more of a comment on the product. It's more a comment on the work, right?
Yeah, if a work is the enjoyment of which is only dependent on reveals, on like plot, not even surprises, but plot surprises. Because I can still be surprised by something I've seen already, if it's got depth and richness.
Yeah, in many and varied ways. That's the whole love of it, isn't it? That's the love of something like Shakespeare, obviously, which everybody knows because it's everywhere. You see different things, different layers and interpretations are revealed. In fact, it's really odd. There is a version of Othello that's on the BBC iPlayer at the moment, and I'm so familiar with Othello's one of the plays I am really familiar with, and it does something really fascinating with Iago, which is it makes him funny, makes him really funny. And it's not something you would immediately associate with Iago. Obviously, the tendency is to present him as a villain, as manipulative and monstrous. But it's the actor's performance and the way he delivered his lines, so particularly the soliloquies, were charming and funny and sort of got the audience on side, and people were laughing. People were laughing in the audience. And I was like, this is great. This is wonderful. It wasn't, they didn't do anything, obviously, like change anything. They didn't change the language or anything like that. It was all in the felicities of the performance. And it was brilliant.
I like that. I mean, there's a version of it with Ian McKellen where I think he slightly leads into a humorous aspect. It's not, I wouldn't say it's not clownish, but he plays a version of Iago that is definitely more sort of slyly humorous. Iago's a very knowing character, which I think works for that. Because Iago obviously is a deeply unpleasant and actually quite pathetic person.
Absolutely.
But relative to a lot of Shakespeare's villains, I think he has a self-comprehension that kind of plays into his villainy. He's actually kind of aware of how debased he is in many ways.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I think so. I mean, you see it in the way that he acts, in the way that he can't leave it well enough alone. It does, even when his plans are basically coming to fruition, he can't leave it alone. He can't, if there is an opportunity to ruin something, to make it immediately polluted and unpleasant, he'll do it, even if it compromises his own plans. I mean, it's something that's so wonderful about Iago. He's conscious of his own villainy. He knows that he's a monster. He knows that everything he touches becomes toxic and unpleasant, but he doesn't know why. And that's great. That's great. He gives myriad different explanations as to why he does what he does. They're always contradictory.
Yeah. No, I mean he's primarily driven by envy, which I think that kind of fits into the pattern of in general. But yeah, I mean if you look at other Shakespeare villains, sometimes they will do a thing. I mean King Lear, I can't remember the name, but they'll sometimes do a thing of almost trying to sort of reclaim villainy,
Yes,
sort of
yeah,
own it. But it's not. But they're doing that very much in the sense that they do think they're right,
yes,
very
yeah.
much. Iago really doesn't think he's right. I
Well, it
don't
doesn't
think
even
he
seem. It's so
care.
interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't even seem to have like. It's not like say Richard III, who
Mm,
has ambition. He has a clear agenda, which is to get the throne. That is what he wants. He wants control. He wants power, which is evil as it is a rational thing. Iago doesn't have any outcome. He doesn't have any particular stated desire other than to sow ruination around himself.
yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. He is just a sort of almost purely destructive being.
Yeah,
Which again works with his primary motivation
yeah.
quite well. Like he's not he doesn't feel particularly wounded or aggrieved, except that somebody exists who's better than him.
Yeah,
That's the
that's
that's
basically it. Yeah,
yeah.
and ironically, I mean, one of the ironies of Othello I've always found is by his manipulation of Othello, which, by the way, doesn't really take very much. Let's be honest. He demonstrates that Othello is not better than him. Othello is a terrible person.
Yes,
Othello is a
yeah.
terrible, terrible, terrible man. Who is immediately misogynist and regards women as objects and mistrusts everyone around him. It takes almost nothing for him to become murderous towards his friends, his closest friends, and the woman he professes to love. So yeah, Iago is what I love about certain productions of the play is they demonstrate how Iago is almost incidental in
Mm,
playing on tensions that are already there. It's the same thing that you get in films like The Joker,
yeah.
where is it Arthur Fleck? He is completely, as his name suggests, he's incidental.
No,
Doesn't matter.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this idea, like, there is this because there's this whole tension throughout the Joker, and I hope they retain that in the sequel.
Mhm.
Um, of you really get a sense that that he is irrelevant and that he's almost like a kind of proxy for what's going on. Like the idea that he causes this riot does just kind of look absurd within the logic of the film. I mean, it plays on like obviously the idea that he is the Batman Joker, which is actually just faintly ridiculous. Like he just clearly isn't in any way like a mastermind who's going to go around fighting a caped crusader. Like it's such an anti-superhero film,
It
yeah.
profoundly is, isn't it? Profoundly. I mean, after watching it for the first time, I was of the opinion that cinematically Batman was done. I just don't see, I didn't see how you could do
Unfortunately.
it. Yeah, I didn't see how you could do Batman again with that satire of Batman in place, because
So
it really does demonstrate the hypocrisy at the heart of the character and of the entire mythology. It's
certainly not
really
so soon and so
no.
like with such little commentary and awareness of that as a
Mhm,
dynamic. I mean, I found that last Batman film incredibly tedious, even though I think some of the acting in it was really good, and I think it had excellent atmosphere.
mhm,
It was in many ways consummately well made,
mhm.
but the writing and the plotting and the themes. I mean, it was bizarre that the main character was this kind of almost fascistic incel, but drained of any actual content that fascism has. So he wasn't, a misogynist or had any kind of like prejudicial narrative behind him. He just sort of behaved vaguely like a sort of um, fascist terrorist would.
Yeah, so he's sort of a pure authoritarian in that regard. Very like Nolan's Batman. I mean, towards the end of that series, that's pretty much what Batman becomes.
Oh yeah, and that I mean it's just straightforward
It's
apologetics for
overt, isn't
Bush,
it? It's
right?
overt, right? It's absolutely overt. I mean, much as I do love the Dark Knight for many, many reasons, that's one of its politics is pretty reprehensible.
I mean, the third one is almost funny.
Openly.
Like
It's so funny. I mean, it's openly fascist, isn't it? I mean, the second one you can sort of hum and ha. Yes, it's more sort of like a liberal centrist take on things, but the third one is openly fascist. It's openly fascist.
They have the Scarecrow running a revolutionary court like he's in France or something. I mean, it's just I you know, obviously my ideological enemies, but I kind of admire when they're so flagrantly silly. Like, if you're gonna do it, you may as well do it like that. It's
go completely nuts. Yeah, absolutely. And also completely misuse the characters. You know, misuse Cillian Murphy, but you've got him and you do nothing with him. Absolutely nothing with him. Same with Tom Hardy, of course, as Bane. I mean, it's. I don't know how they got away with that. I don't know how they got away with that. How terrible that actual performance and portrayal of Bane actually is.
I think Tom Hardy was just having fun, to be honest. Like, I get the feeling he does not take the part particularly seriously, and I do not blame him for that whatsoever. I don't blame. Like it's an impossible part to take seriously.
It's pretty poor, isn't it? It's pretty poor. That portrayal of Bane is pretty bad. But also the whole. I mean, there's also the aesthetic thing as well with the mask and the way he's speaking makes him very hard to understand. That is a sincere criticism of the film. Half the time when he's giving these soliloquies, you know, I have no idea what he's saying.
Well, Nolan has a long track record of issues around sound and intelligibility. Like that's a long-standing issue. I think he also just has a general problem of being overly portentous without really earning it. You know, it's always an issue, I think, with the increasing adultification of Batman, that if you're not going to do anything interesting with it, being that portentous is just kind of silly. Like, this is a man in a bat outfit. Like,
absolutely. Like, if you're not going to actually kind of undermine the material to a degree, if you're not going to satirize it to a degree, then there's no point in doing it. Or if you're not going to take Batman off the rails a little bit, off the beaten track. I mean, funnily enough, the show that seems to be doing that at the moment is the new X-Men show.
I mean, that's almost just bringing out, I think, the better interpretation of what is already the implicit logic of X-Men. Just like really bringing the most radical sides of X-Men to the fore. I would say is what's going on there. I mean, it has been amazing. Like you go into the first couple of episodes and you've got the Capitol Hill riots being satirized, like by, you know, with Friends of Humanity as sort of like MAGA types. I mean, it's amazing and a great deal of fun. I mean, also quite harrowing. The fifth episode is absolutely a difficult watch.
I think a lot of people were really shocked by that one, and rightly so. I mean, it's the way it's retained the flavor of the 1990s show that really gets me. It still essentially feels like the same show. I mean, it's just beautifully updated.
To do something on genocide in the current context is I not expected from Disney Plus.
No, it really is. And what I liked, I mean, the portrayal of Genosha obviously was flagrantly queer, which I was very, very happy about. Very happy about. It was effectively a queer utopia. To the point whereby they made a point of demonstrating how, like, mores about physical contact were sort of thrown away here. You know, people were very touchy in Genosha, and it was very, very sweet and pleasant, you know?
They're leaning a lot into the queerness. They're leaning a lot into sort of intersectional stuff, and I mean, I'm really looking forward to the end of the series, because it's called, I think, Tolerance's Extinction or something like that, which is just
really
fantastic
wonderful
title. Part 2.
I mean, they are absolutely aware of some of the central problems with X-Men media. They are absolutely aware of it. I mean, at the beginning of the Genosha episode, there is someone holding a banner that says Magneto is right.
Yeah.
Which is one of the core problems, of course. It's one of the core criticisms that a lot of fans have of both the comics and their adaptations, certainly in all of the adaptations, they try their best to portray Magneto as a bad guy and then demonstrate unintentionally that he's absolutely right.
Quite often, or they have to lean into him doing such absurdly ridiculous things to reassert his villainy. But like, it's really interesting how much that's resonated. Like, I was on a Saturday demo against the cast report. Obviously, mostly trans people, a lot of queer allies, a rather large showing from the far left, larger than I expected.
Good.
Yeah, no, that is good, and including my own organisation. A little plug there for ACR. We were there in force, but there was a person holding a sign that I did manage to photograph, saying Magneto is right, which I just love that. I mean, there's lots of that stuff, which is
Oh well, the crossover is evident, the metaphor is evident, and the show is very aware of it. It is absolutely. It's giving you a sort of, as the X-Men have always been, from conception to this point. Originally, that of course they were more. It was more about racism, enshrined racism and intolerance. But it's since then, it's evolved to include queer resonance, and now, of course, because trans people are the scapegoat du jour at the moment. That's where the metaphor lies. That's where it's strongest. That's where it can do the most good.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot there. I mean, there are obviously other resonances with global events and stuff, but yeah, I mean, I think there's always been a quite strong queer component. I mean, even in those, I remember the original films. There's a line in, I think, the second where
is this the Bobby Iceman bit where his parents, his mum says, "Have you tried not being a mutant?"
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a great little
it's brilliant because it is.
Thing.
I mean, it's overt, isn't it? That is overt because it was. I don't know if it still is a thing, but at that time, that was sort of a classic concerned parent thing to say to a queer child, right? Have you tried not being gay? Have you tried not being this, or whatever?
I mean, it's definitely something I've heard in the trans community from younger people still. I mean, like, because I personally feel like the entire medical system is like this idea of arguing over conversion therapy. On the one hand, yes, we absolutely need to get it banned. On the other hand, like, I just think all trans healthcare is conversion therapy at some level, whether it's through excessive weights, whether it's through bureaucratic obstacles, whether it's through just a constant drip of hostility that you meet at every level. I mean, not even just accessing it for gender care, but like if I access the healthcare system for anything, they will pull up that I'm on hormones and they will raise it. So I've had doctors ask me about my multiple sclerosis in relation to hormones, any mental health issues, and an issue I had with my neck. None of which could be caused by estrogen, and one of which predates the transition. So there's a chronological problem there. But we call it sort of trans broken arm syndrome or trans broken leg syndrome sometimes in the community. Like, everything is attributed to being trans at some level.
It's funny, but there's a lot of overlap with other marginalized communities. I mean, I work in social care, obviously, and we get it with our service users all the time. It's completely unrelated things. Oh, it's because of their condition. Oh, it's because they have a learning difficulty. It's like, it fucking isn't. We know it's not, and it's a severe and pervasive problem in the NHS. It really is, No,
absolutely. No, I agree. I mean, even with like the MS, it's something I'm always aware of because essentially don't have access to what is a number one sort of telltale symptom of a problem for other people, which is fatigue, because
Right.
I get fatigue all the time. So,
Hmm.
and I am always worried with like dealing with healthcare professionals that they will tend to attribute things to MS that might be a symptom of another issue, which is like, and it puts people with chronic health conditions at a higher than normal risk, obviously, because
Of course.
early detection is pretty good to have as a thing.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, one of the other factors that's happening in the NHS, barring the fact that it's deliberately and phenomenally underfunded, in order to, effectively destroy it by sabotage, is the fact that they're terrified at the moment because of the cultural climate surrounding trans issues. They are terrified of being seen to take a side or do this or do that, when all they're doing is providing baseline care, or what they should be doing is providing baseline care that's been there for decades, that's been there for years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I guess there's like different dimensions to that, but the cast review is entirely designed to augment that fear.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's been, it's been absolutely pilloried that by anyone who has any knowledge of this situation, medical, psychological, it has been absolutely ripped to shreds as very little but a piece of ideology, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, the politics of it is transparent, and in fact, Cass herself seems to have repudiated a large chunk of it, at least at one interview. I don't think she's particularly all there, to be honest. Like, she seems all over the place.
I know, right? By the way, too late. Too late. The damage is done. The damage is done. It's been picked up and used by, by all of those factors that want some sort of something they can point to and say, look, this is what we've been talking about. That's what it's been used as. And of course, you're every person on the street, they're going to be reading that whatever whatever hideous tabloid runs with it, or they're going to be watching the fucking BBC and thinking this is smoking gun, this is bad, and they won't do any further research. They won't actually look into it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the point of it. And now they're running an adult version of the cast report,
of course
that
was the point. That was the point, obviously. And before you know it, before long, they're going to be doing that thing where they'll be the wedge in the door. They'll be widening it and widening it and widening it. I keep talking to my my gay siblings about this. You need to be on the lookout. It shouldn't take this, by the way. It shouldn't take a threat to yourself. It should, or to your particular demographic. You should be on side out of basic decency and humanity, and also a love for truth, right? But actual truth. But no, you need to be on the lookout because they're coming for us as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're all interconnected. I mean, one of the things I've been pointing out a lot in conversation, and I need to write about this, although it be. I'm neurodivergent, but I'm not in any way a scholar of neurodivergence or neurodivergent issues. And I wouldn't mind getting perspective from people who are more informed than me on this stuff. But one of the things that Cass does a bit is talk about the high rate of autism in particular amongst trans people, which is entirely true. There is a much higher rate. I mean, it's a common trope within the trans community that we often talk about. The problem with that are many. I mean, the way that she discusses neurodivergence is, I think, not only deeply transphobic but deeply disableist.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what you see all the time from the TERF side, the GC side. They clearly regard autism as some sort of profound deficiency and something that they is icky. Something that's the way they talk about it. That's the way they talk about it in relation to trans identities, as though, you see, you're diseased in this way, so you're also diseased in this way. That's the way they basically market it.
Yeah. And I think with there's a complex history there as well, because a lot of conversion therapy is, as there's a lot of attacks on different groups of the oppressed, finds its roots in disableism in some form or another. And there's a lot of roots of conversion therapy in the way that autistic people have been treated, in the way that there's been attempts to cure them of autism.
Still is, by the way.
Still is,
like,
yeah,
the
absolutely.
amount of medical grifters who claim that they can cure autism.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you could. Oh,
No, it's vile stuff.
it's
But
vile. Yeah, I mean, I would go to jail if I encountered one of them in person. I would go to jail. I know I would.
They certainly deserve a let's say robust. But the other side to this, of course, is that trans people are not the only demographic for whom there is a higher than average amount of autism. There's obviously many such things in different cultural spheres and different religious spheres, etc. But there is also a higher than average amount of autism, quite a significantly higher than average, if albeit not as high as for trans people, amongst LGBT people.
Yes.
So they've got all of the pretext to go after LGBT people there. If they're saying that it's problematic that trans people are presenting as autistic, they're saying that casts doubt in our own testimonies about ourselves, then the exact same logic can easily be applied to a lot of LGBT people.
And they're already doing it. Yeah. They're already doing it. I mean, I've already seen them talking about things like education about queer identities in general. In, say, sex education, they've already started discussing that amongst themselves. Because, of course, the other thing that we often don't talk about is that gay people, by our very nature, we also throw into question gender norms.
Yeah,
we always have. That's part and parcel. The reason people have forgotten is because there is a certain degree of that awful word acceptance or tolerance now. That's of cultural approbation. That's the only reason we've forgotten. But if you go back to as recently as the 1980s, early 1990s, and you look at reports in, articles in tabloids that traditionally hate us, like the Daily Mail or the Spectator or whatnot, that's exactly what those columnists talk about.
Yeah,
it's exactly the language they use. It's always misogynist language. They don't like the fact, particularly with gay men, they have a real problem with gay men, just as transphobes primarily but not universally have more of a problem with trans women, it seems. That seems to be the focal point.
Yeah, the idea, like the difference of, so there's a complexity in terms of the way that the oppression, I think, impacts trans masks and trans femmes, and I would imagine you could extend that to how homophobia impacts lesbians and gay men, and obviously
and subcultures within. I mean, you have that situation where you have the more effeminately presenting gay men versus the more masculine. Same with lesbians too, right? And people respond to them differently in different ways for very complex cultural reasons.
Absolutely, yeah. Like there are
bottom line, we by our natures, and we should do this. This is our nature. We throw into question traditional prescription gender norms, and we should.
Yeah. I mean,
we absolutely should.
It's unavoidable that I mean the gender binary, which I think is at the heart of this and is at the heart of misogyny. I've written with Twy about this idea of a sort of vector of oppression that has its basis in misogyny, and then travels through homophobia and transphobia. But the logic is one coherent logic. There's one basis for that oppression, the gender binary depends upon the idea that there aren't just certain ways of identifying yourself or being within the biological quote unquote prescriptions, but also behaviors, and sexual behaviors are absolutely at the core of that. It's a huge part of it is about regulating sexual behaviors, and I mean that's why they're so obsessed with trans people in hypersexual ways, the ways in which transphobia is as a sort of genre prejudice, a very fetishistic one.
As it always is, right? It is.
Yeah.
It is with gay people too, and it always has been. They always focus upon the minutiae of the sexual act.
Yeah.
And these are people, ironically, when you look at the way they talk, they get their mores about queer sexuality from pornography.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's hilarious. I mean, it's hilarious stuff.
As a trans woman, I could definitely attest to like just the degree to which people that I encounter, even in relationships, but even outside relationships as well, have ideas about me that seem to come from porn. That are completely inaccurate. That like have like no I mean, like even just on the level of like how estrogen works,
right.
completely. It's quite amazing, and they're obsessed with porn. Of course, they're obsessed with the idea that porn is part of what makes us trans. They're obsessed with the details of trans pornography. It is quite revealing about them.
It really is, and I'm glad you used that word obsessed. Actually, I'm glad you used that word obsessed, because that is definitely my takeaway from every, and it's not just a handful, it's every encounter I've ever had, online and offline, with a TERF, someone who identifies as as gender critical or whatever. That is it's the thread that runs through all of them. Obsession.
Yeah.
They are obsessed in a way that is creepy, that is stalkerish, that is bizarre, quite frankly. I mean, absolutely bizarre. It's like it's a worm that eats their personalities, isn't it? It eats their identities away to the point whereby there is nothing else. I had there was an ex-friend of mine now, actually, who was a gay man, and became very, very transphobic during the lockdowns. And people were telling him on his Facebook page, "Look, this is all you talk about now. This is all you talk about. You never say anything different. You used to be such a decent guy. You used to have interests. You used to have fascinations outside of this, but this has eaten your mind." And that, again, is a running thread. Something I see in all of them. They don't seem to understand. They lack capacity to see that the brain worms have gotten in and have eaten everything else.
It becomes so existential to their senses of selves that they really do see the existence of us as a threat to their existence. And that's why, like, it's another reason why any kind of attempt to moderate our position to gain acceptance through that just doesn't work, because
the reaching across the aisle thing. No, it is never going. I'm sorry, Mr. Stephen Fry. It's not going to work. You can't do it. You first of all, this lot, if you reached across the aisle with them, they would rip your hand off like a load of rabid dog, because they are insane. I've dealt with homophobes, obviously, and even as bad as they get, I don't think I've ever encountered in my life as vicious or as paranoid or as ignorant or as obsessive as I have the transphobes. Maybe that's just luck on my part, but I just haven't. I haven't encountered that to the same degree. And even if you're an ally, they come after you, right? They are obsessive. They're insane.
I think sometimes they can be particularly vociferous with especially loud allies. I mean, they're because their primary goal is to isolate us and not allow us a voice. So anybody that gives us, especially somebody who gives us a platform, is definitely, especially if it's a big platform, comes under a special eye. Their whole thing is, we want to debate. Why won't you allow us to debate? But they don't. They ruthlessly shut down trans people whenever we put. Exactly. It's sort of prejudice 101 stuff.
They can't allow it, can they? They can't allow it, because if people's, it's just like, it's exactly what was done with gay people beforehand. It's exactly what was done with gay people in decades of yore. If people were exposed to the people that others are trying to get them to hate, they would realize they're just people. And there's really nothing to be afraid of. There is no threat here whatsoever. There is just paranoid scapegoating.
Yeah,
And nothing else. And they can't allow that. They absolutely cannot allow that. There's also a generational thing. Have you noticed this? There's a huge generational divide. I mean, like young people, by and large, like generations beneath ours in the UK, they're looking at this and they're like, what are you talking about? They have their queer brothers and sisters, their uncles, their parents in many cases, their friends, and they're like,
that's definitely a big dimension. I think there are complexities there because there was a really interesting Financial Times piece about a growing disparity of politics between younger women and younger men, with younger men especially sort of below a certain age point, like Gen Z, becoming increasingly more right-wing, whereas younger women becoming increasingly more left-wing on social issues. Yeah. I think there's been a limit to how much that's expressed itself politically in this country because the political right is so pervasively anti-young. It's so pervasively hostile to youth.
Yes,
but I do worry that in the context of, say, a Labour government, which we're likely to get, a particularly nasty Labour government, I expect, under the, I mean, they certainly know no champions of trans people.
No, absolutely. In the Labour Party. Or queer people in general, let's be honest, they are absolutely not. And let's be honest, allies to no one who Labour ideally should be allies to.
No, I think it's a party of a certain sort of idea of a certain privileged section of the working class that is in diminishment anyway, that's going to forge together an electoral coalition mostly out of the tattered ruins of the Tory party and just how much they've damaged their brand. But I do worry because I think in that context, particularly of a Starmer government that doesn't deliver, and I fully expect that his government can't, that a lot of young men will be driven to the far right, as they are in places like France, for example, already. And, you know, that's certainly something that the far right themselves, people like Nigel Farage have talked about this, are looking at with a degree of rapacious eagerness.
I mean, it's the only place they can go, isn't it? Because I think what they've realized, the talking heads like Farage, is that their demographic traditionally is aged and dying. You know, that's the bottom line, isn't it? It is dying. So they need a new tactic. They need something else. And the only thing they can really have is by sowing disparity. It's all they've ever had, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think like they are looking to young men in a post-Starmer context with very much that hope that there is, and I mean I think I do see it like not just amongst young men. There are aspects of youth culture that I think have. I'm always wary of a kind of progressive view that just takes for granted the radicalness and political commonality with us of the young, that just kind of think that there's this sort of inevitable process of the young becoming more and more progressive and the old sort of fading away. I mean, obviously, if that was true historically, we wouldn't have any of the problems that we do.
We wouldn't be where we are. Yeah, that's absolutely the case.
But like beyond that, I think just in very concrete terms, you know, there are seeds of deeply reactionary strains within certain aspects of youth culture. Within men, obviously, the men's rights movement, the incels, the so-called black pill people, and all of that kind of really vicious online culture that I kind of grew up in many ways as a very online kid and saw firsthand. I've never, you know, I have a deep affection for geek culture, and I am in every way a geek. But I've never quite believed this sort of cell of geek culture is just inherently progressive. I mean, you look at gamer culture, and it's full of like reactionaries.
We've seen that not be the case, right? I mean, we're dealing with it right now. Of course, there's the whole Games Workshop thing. Oh no, there are female custodies. Oh no.
It's so
Oh,
tedious, isn't
He-Man!
it?
It is so fucking tedious. I'm telling you. We had some. The Fluff and Hammer's a very lovely place. It really is. We're actually one of the best. I will say we're actually one of the best cultures on in Warhammer. We're really. It's a very
No,
progressive
from what I've seen, I'd agree.
um,
It's really good.
but we did have one this afternoon who did the usual shit, the usual nonsense. It was the usual sort of like, oh, decades of lore. God, oh. Actually, it's not decades of lore because there's been nothing on the Custodies until like what, sixth, seventh edition. They were just aesthetic. They were just, there was hardly anything on them whatsoever. So bullshit for a start. Second of all, 10,000 years. 10,000 years. Do you have any idea how long that is? Do you honestly think that someone, even within the law, 10,000 years, you honestly think someone hasn't thought about it by now? We should have female Astartes by now. Of course we should.
I mean, it's also there's so many. I mean, for starters, the idea that Warhammer 40,000 canon is consistent is absurd on the face of it. But
of course,
but
of course it is.
The other problem is that the Games Workshop have always given itself outs and loopholes. There are two missing Primarchs about whom we know nothing.
Exactly.
Like it's easy to see all kinds of ways without even breaking the canon. The Games Workshop could do that. It's such
within the central satire, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Within the central sort of dystopian satire of the universe, it makes perfect sense because. Do you honestly think that this engine cares about minutiae like gender?
Yeah, I mean that's always been
you honestly think it cares? Humanity's a resource, right?
Yeah,
you've got situations where humanity is filleted and lobotomized and turned into these weird spidery cyborg that have like no identifiable gender whatsoever. So, do you honestly think they give a shit?
It's such a as you said initially, it's such a tedious sort of like, and it's just so
tedious.
It's tedious because they're not actually saying what they're really saying. They're not like
I was talking to Adam, other founder of the Fluff and Hammer, over WhatsApp this afternoon, and that is exactly what I said to him. It's like, look, they are not dealing honestly. They are throwing up the usual euphemisms and distractionary bullshit because ultimately they don't want to be revealed as entitled children throwing a temper tantrum, which is what they are. They want culture to cater to them exclusively. They don't want to acknowledge that the sandpit doesn't belong to them. And that's it. That is the end of it. They are entitled children who've never ever developed beyond being like 12 years old. They're He-Man Woman Haters Club juveniles in men's bodies. That's the bottom line, right?
Yeah, no,
I mean, the other thing, there's a video going up later on the channel where I ask this question. It's like, okay, demonstrate to me how this is in any way going to affect anything, because it isn't. The only thing that will maybe happen down the line, you'll get some alternative heads in one of the model kits.
Yeah. It's
that's it, right? The Custodies are not changing.
Like,
the Custodies are not changing in any way, shape, or form. The status of the universe is not changing in any way, shape, or form. The metaphysics of the universe is not changing in any way, shape, or form. It's not changing anything.
No, it's as you say, they're just angry that they don't get to have this proprietariness over an aspect of culture, which is such a warped way of engaging with any culture to want to own it in that way.
Sadly, it's something. I mean, to be 100% fair, it's not pervasive. It's a vocal minority. It is a vocal minority within like the fan base of Games Workshop. The vast majority are basically saying the same thing, which is, "Oh, grow up." Just grow up. And that's the only way. I don't, at this point, I don't engage. In the same way I don't engage the TERFs. I don't know whether you've seen some of the exchanges on Twitter, but I just tell them to go fuck themselves because I can't be bothered with them, Well,
I abandoned Twitter for entirely that reason. This was pre Musk.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Quite a while ago.
Oh, yeah. I left Twitter a long time ago. I kept complaining about sort of graphic violent imagery, transphobic graphic violent imagery that I'd encountered, and they'd always refuse to take it down. Sometimes, although not always, even this, they would put like a thing over it, like a content warning, which and I mean, very graphic. We're talking images of like grotesque versions of trans women being murdered and stuff like that. I just got a bit too sick of it, so I abandoned it. It just wasn't good for my mental health either.
I mean, it's a disaster zone. Were it not for the fact that I use it for, it's a platform for promotion, for whatnot, I wouldn't use it at all.
I'm definitely not moralistic about social media. I just, ideally, I shouldn't be on any of them, but Facebook is okay because I've got a good coterie of friends on there, so that works.
It's easier to curate as well. Facebook is slightly easier to curate, whereas Twitter is not. Twitter is a disaster zone. And getting worse. I mean, getting much, much worse on a purely functional level. I mean, I always say to my friends, like, if you want a microcosm of what billionaires are doing to the world, to our cultures, just look at Twitter. This is what they do, right? They come clomping in with their size 800s and just obliterate everything with their sense of entitlement and their inferiority complexes.
Musk is incredible, isn't he? Though I mean, he almost feels like you get these Russian propaganda cartoons with like images of like American billionaires, and he feels like one of those. He feels like a caricature of capitalism.
If at some point Musk put out a video where he sort of peeled back like a wig and pulled a mask down and he was an actor underneath, I'm going to say this is the greatest act of satire ever, I would buy it.
Yeah.
Because it's so ridiculous. It is, and then you look at his history, of course, and you realize that like every billionaire spoiled brat child ever, everything he's touched is destroyed. Everything that his PR company has proclaimed that he invented, he did not. It's all of that stuff. It's the same nonsense over and over again. And it's not that difficult to work out. I mean, these people, they are not like real people. They've never gone through the stuff that makes people into what they are, into complex entities or into whole personalities. They've been insulated from that. All of the frictions that propagate identity and personality aren't there. They've never been there. So they have no idea about anything at all.
I mean, a great tragedy of capitalism is that all of this obscene wealth is concentrated on the creation of this numerically very tiny elite, and they're not even particularly happy people. Like, they're not they're clearly not deeply alienated.
Clearly not. I mean, if Rowling has taught us anything useful, it's the fact. I mean, Clive Barker. I mean, did you see this? Clive Barker, one of the very, very few interviews that he gives now, because he's not a well man. He said at a press, I think it was a press event about the recent Hellraiser film. He just doesn't understand why a woman who lives in a castle with all the wealth and comfort in the world can't just be happy. It can't just stop targeting vulnerable demographics and just live. I mean, the amount of experiences, right, that any one of us would have with a fraction of her money and her influence, the stuff he would do, and not, that would not involve sitting on Twitter.
I mean, that is astonishing, isn't it? That somebody with those, who's granted those capacities, I think entirely wrongly and obscenely, but nonetheless, like uses that in such a trite way, if nothing else. Like not even like interesting at the level of villainy, but just really, really mediocre.
Mediocre. Like I think you said, didn't you, at one point, we deserve better enemies, and
no, I think
we really do. A better caliber, please.
I think that's one of the great things about fiction. Like it's great to dream of having like actual monsters that
Yeah,
are worthy of us in some sense. Like the people that class society actually throws up are such husks of human beings. So I mean that's what actually something I really like about Clive Barker, because he has that kind of two categories of monster.
yes.
He has the metaphysical monsters that are almost natural or preternatural forces,
Mhm.
and then he has these pathetic people that are
Yes.
sort of cloying and grabbing at trying to own something that by its very protean nature cannot be
Cannot.
owned.
Exactly that. That's exactly it. And it's very clear from his work where the real evil is, of course. I mean,
Yeah,
no matter how bad some of his mythic characters get, and they get pretty bad. I mean, like, characters like Immaculata, I think she says at one point, she just says, I want slow genocide. And it's like, yeah, she's pretty evil. He has sympathy for those characters because of their mythic nature, but characters like Shadwell or
mm,
Marty Whitehead from the Damnation game, none whatsoever.
no,
None whatsoever. They're the real evil. These shabby materialists
yeah,
just want.
contemptible.
They're absolutely contemptible when they have access to miracles, which in any real sense, because of course whenever Barker uses magical miracles, he's using it as a metaphor for imagination, obviously. And Rowling has access to this, as limited as it might be, and
Mm,
abuses it.
yeah, yeah.
In the worst possible way.
I mean,
It's
it is that impulse to control and own things that are not ownable by their very nature. I mean, I think with someone like Rowling, there clearly is deep trauma there. I don't
Mhm.
care. I
No,
have no
no,
sympathy for
absolutely.
her at
It
all.
is
But
not
there
an
is clearly
excuse.
deep
It,
trauma, and
I
she's
think
trying to.
I think you're right. I think one of the things with Rowling is that, assuming it's true, she came purportedly from a fairly abusive marriage at one point, and has, as a result, this issue with men, and believes nominally, so, she will not accept that trans women are women. She sees men for some reason, and just cannot get over. She's sort of like projecting her own trauma out
Yeah,
onto the world and has a platform in order to do it.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, there's a
and it's
long-standing thing of, I think, trans women having to sort of pay for the crimes of cis men,
yes,
which
oh God,
is, yeah,
yes, oh
and
absolutely,
it's
yeah,
particularly ugly. But like, she's also, I mean, she also says in that ludicrous and also risibly badly written essay on trans people that was put out and almost awarded an Orwell Prize, which is just obscene. Even
yeah,
as a stylist, I find that obscene.
yeah,
Never mind the content.
yeah,
The she's got a line in that about how, and it's thinking you hear a lot from the transphobes about how if trans identity and consciousness had been around when they were young, that they would have come out. Which is like, I don't think that, and I really resist this idea of like, oh, transphobes are all just
yeah,
secretly
yeah.
themselves trans. That's always a particularly reactionary way of taking
Yes.
that. But I do think
Again, it's derived from the old canard, isn't it? That all homophobes are just actually secretly gay and bitter.
exactly that. Yeah, exactly that. And but I do think that most transphobes seem to have a very fraught relationships with their own genders. I think
Mhm.
like a lot of them. I also
Yeah.
just think cis people in general more often do than not. I have a friend who routinely asks cis people about how they would react if they woke up as the opposite sex,
Mhm.
and it is surprising how many are not particularly bothered by that
Like,
as an
yeah,
idea.
I would put myself in that category. Don't care.
And
What is the gender identity of null, of just no traction at all?
hmm, I
It's
mean,
like being white to me. It's being male, whatever.
gender is like, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think cis people's genders are much more, I mean, they're obviously more complex than the binary in which people are put because everyone is. It's the very nature of that binary
Absolutely.
to massively simplify. But also
Absolutely.
like this conception of the stability of cisgenders,
Well, whoever,
cisgender
I mean,
people is.
if you have an imagination, surely that is one of the things you've imagined.
Yeah, I mean, if we're
Surely.
all being divided up into these two discrete categories,
Yeah,
it's very organically
surely.
natural.
To imagine what would I be like as the opposite gender.
Hmm.
That is a natural thing to imagine, right?
Yeah, and it's quite fascinating, like the way that this threads through transphobic language and rhetoric and the sort of transphobic imaginary, as I sometimes refer
Mhm.
to it.
Yeah.
They are clearly cis people who are deeply troubled by the idea that
Yeah.
that their identities and their genders themselves are unstable. A lot of this is about trying to restabilize a sense of self that is fractured and deeply torn, and you can see that in almost all
Yeah.
of the
Oh,
obsessives.
yes, and it's true across the board, isn't it? Of anyone who is anti-queer in any particular way, I mean, there is not. I mean, as every gay person knows, there is nothing queerer, nothing gayer than a guy going on about how masculine they are.
Yeah,
There is nothing more transparently gay. You know, it's Tom Cruise jumping on Oprah's sofa shouting about how he loves Katie Holmes. You know, it's like, yeah, that's really gay, man. That is so revealing. It's unbelievable. There is nothing. It is it's the case of the Emperor's New Clothes. I mean, you know, or the lady
yeah,
doesn't protest too much.
yeah,
Um, that's the irony, isn't it? That's the irony. You are revealing by the extremity of the expression how unstable your identity is, or how uncertain you are about it. Right? You
yeah,
don't need to go
absolutely.
on about it. You don't need to go on about how straight you are
Yeah,
if you're straight, and if you're absolutely straight. Like one of the straightest people I've ever met, because of course you know, sexuality, like all things, is basically a spectrum. There's people exist at various different
mm,
points. One of the straightest people I know is my brother, Matt, and he is just straight. You know,
mm,
he's casually straight. It's just like whatever. It
mm.
doesn't mean anything to him. He just is.
I
It's
mean,
not something he will go on about or talk about, because it's like, what? Why would you?
yeah, if it's not problematized by society, then it's not something that you're uncomfortable about yourself. There's no need
There's no
to have
point.
any kind of affectation around it. It's just
Exactly.
is,
It just is.
absolutely. And
It
I
just
think you're
is.
absolutely right. Like all of these things, these categories are just so much more inherently unstable, and I think people want to accept and
Well,
I mean, I think anybody
I
who's
don't
been
know
through.
about I don't know about you, Ron, but this was evident to me from a very young age.
I mean, I
Like,
think in terms
massively evident.
of my own youth, I guess everything was through the prism of being, I guess the trans language is sort of egg, but
Yes, of course.
not knowing exactly what was going on, and there were lots of aspects of that, especially. I mean, one of the reasons why I find the cast stuff so deeply painful is because I think it would have inordinately helped me to have been able to have gone on to, puberty blockers. I think puberty was an incredibly difficult experience, as it is for most,
Well,
many, if not most, trans people.
and to be
Um,
honest, I mean, it's more. I imagine it's more difficult for trans people, but it's horrific and horrifically underrepresented across the board, isn't it?
oh
Let's be
yeah,
honest.
as an experience in and of itself, I think it's under. I mean, I have a general view that most things in our society are under ritualized, but
Yeah.
also that rituals are far too static and staid, the ones that
Mhm.
do exist, to really account for the various transitions that everybody experiences in life.
Mhm.
And then you also reach a certain point where it almost becomes such that life is just entirely non-ritualized outside of maybe
Yeah.
marriage and death.
Mhm.
And then I think even there's often a poverty of ritual, even around those things. The ritual is often very, inadequate.
Oh, isn't it
Um,
just? Isn't it just? It's yeah, it's something that's really it's been part of my experience of this year thus far, to be honest. Lots of death. Don't know why. There's been a lot of death this year, and it's it's not only inadequate, it's insulting. It's insultingly prescribed. The
Yeah.
way it diminishes grief and the profundity of it, the incredible profundity of it for everyone concerned.
Mourning is something that I think people it's not something that's particularly valued. I mean, obviously not, because doesn't fit the profit motive. But
That's it exactly. That's it exactly.
Yeah.
Right. It's industrialized.
Yeah.
That's the big horror of it. It's industrialized.
Yeah.
So it's all about what headstone you're going to have and where you're going to have the service and what flowers you're going to have. Oh, should we have a wake after? Is this how people grieve? No. No.
And more broadly, it's about getting to that point where it no longer matters, getting to that point where the mourning experience is no longer affecting you as a productive unit.
As a worker. So you can get back to work or school and, stop being a problem, right?
Yeah, funerals as a facilitator of work, almost like most therapy that exists today is aimed to get the patient back into work. That's the primary goal of things like, say, CBT. The cheaper end of CBT, definitely, which is most of what the NHS now provides.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a real deficit there. But obviously, yeah, the trans experience of adolescence is quite intense and unique, and it is deeply disturbing to think of young people who could have access to that, and wouldn't have to go through some of the things I went through. I think I developed exercise bulimia and all kinds of things around my own appearance and not being able to control it. And yeah, it's also reckless. ACI uses the slogan that I helped develop of caste means social murder, and I think that's very true. I think that putting people through that unnecessarily is a recipe for social murder. It's a recipe for more trans death, which is
absolutely. It's a kind of backdoor quiet genocide, isn't it? It's like, if we stop them even developing, they won't be a problem anymore. And it's like, well, yeah, actually, you can try. It isn't going to work.
There's definitely. I'm always a bit wary of the language of genocide, because I think, there's just technical issues of application and how that works. But I think there is definitely an eliminationist project, which is definitely doing the same work. I think they want to erase trans people as a conscious group, as a self-aware group. Obviously you can't erase trans people, because you never will. Keep accruing in general. But they want to erase us as a self-aware category, and that's definitely possible.
Yes, that's what they're trying to do. That is what they're trying to do, and it's what they've always tried to do. The species of bigot that you find in the TERFs and the GC crowd, they can't see it in themselves. They just can't. They lack the insight, but they are just the latest incarnation of that very, very common, very, very recurrent species of social ill.
There's that thing, Helen Joyce, one of the sort of arch bigots in the TERF crowd, said that we're a huge problem to a sane world, which I do like, just owning that.
I really like that. I'd have that on a badge.
Yes, a huge problem to a sane world.
I think that's fantastic. Great. I think that's great. It's like, thank you very much. It's amazing how these great phrases can come from awful people, isn't it?
ACL should do that. We already have a CAS equals social murder badge. It would be a good addition. But I like it. But
also, like the inherent irony: a sane world, really.
Well, that's exactly it, isn't it? That displays
your world, Miss Joyce, is sane, is it?
That's the thing, isn't it? This is what really should put left-wing transphobes, so-called left-wing transphobes, to shame. That they're aligning with individuals like that. That they're aligning with.
It should be a contradiction in terms, shouldn't it? It's like gay transphobes. I do not comprehend it. I do not comprehend it. I find that the most bizarre position to take, and I find it, beyond anything else, it's fucking cowardly.
Mm.
It's fucking cowardly. These people, they are Uncle Toms, aren't they? They are. They are Uncle Tom
I think
traitors.
that's a
They
fair
are that.
comparison.
They are
Yeah.
that character from Django Unchained, aren't they?
Yes.
They are
Yes.
Samuel L. Jackson's character from Django Unchained. They think they're going to be okay if they accommodate. They think they're going to be the last one. They're not going to have a place on the trains like the rest of us. And it's like, yeah, you will. Yeah, you
I
will.
think I think that's exactly. I mean, that's the dynamic of respectability politics, isn't it? And I
Absolutely.
think like
Accommodations. I mean, it's a filthy word, isn't it? But they deserve it.
no, I think
Accommodationist. It's a vile, sewer tasting word. But that's exactly what they are.
no, 100%. They're attempting to safeguard the gains that they perceive as having been made. I mean, obviously it doesn't work because, as you mentioned earlier, the logic doesn't go that way. The logic goes that if you start eroding these rights, they all start collapsing.
Yeah,
You can't
what they don't seem to understand is that people they're trying to accommodate, in their eyes, we're all the same.
exactly no,
We're all filthy, degenerate queers who need to go back in the box. You
and
know,
you can't appeal to people who don't want you to exist.
exactly.
There's no
Exactly.
basis. The
It's
only thing
actually
you can do.
it's one of the real problems of what we've come to consider as tolerance and acceptance. As markers of tolerance and acceptance, which are things like, for example, gay marriage. Now, obviously, same-sex marriage should always be allowed. Um, as any dynamic that doesn't include abuse or coercion should. However, one of the problems with that is that you have this almost like subsect of gay married people who are trying to emulate straight culture. They're trying to sort of play up to their straight counterparts. Oh, we're not like them. We're not like filthy queers on Grindr or whatever. We're the respectable ones.
Absolutely no. I think there's a. I mean, sort of heteronormative, I guess, is the sort of academic sort of queer phrase used, but I think that's entirely accurate. That there are people for whom they are not like somebody else is a way of coding themselves as safe.
Yes, safe.
And
Yeah,
that's
we're the
always
okay
been
ones.
yeah, and that's always been that dynamic. And I think there's been that tension between the sexual minority movement and the women's liberation struggle for a long time, with either group being willing to jettison the other to gain ground, but also both groups are obviously in their moments of respectability politics very easily able to jettison trans people. I think because of our liminality, I mean, we're almost ideal for the kinds of backlash that we're getting, and it's why historically we do tend to start gaining ground in the Weimar Republic, in the early Soviet Union, right before there's a reactionary turn. And it feels very much like history is again rhyming. That you have trans people coming to political consciousness, right before usually a horrible authoritarian moment, and be that Stalinism or Nazism or whatever the hell is happening to the world right now. I mean, there's such a pervasive far right turn, I think, globally. That I think people are just.
They need a pivot, don't always. They need the scapegoat. They need the enemy.
I don't know if I added this to an essay, but I think I did once say that that like if trans people didn't exist, they'd have to invent us, sort of thing.
Absolutely.
We're absolutely ideal, and I think like that dynamic, because we're so ideal to preserving the boxes into which they want to put sexual minorities, and also more broadly want to put women into.
Yes.
Because the example of us as a sort of monstrous escape from the rules is so useful at doing that. We don't really exist to them. Like obviously to someone like Rowling, there are no actual trans people in existence. We're sort of caricatured monsters, and you can see this in broader media as well. Like I was kind of maybe getting overly obsessed with this because it's again maybe not the best topic for me to obsess over, but like depictions of trans people, whether positive or negative, will and especially of trans women, will tend to have and feature an inordinate amount of violence, often directed against them. And that's not just directly trans people, but even like highly gender non-conforming people. I compiled a whole list of examples. Even of media I like, even like things like Full Metal Alchemist, which is a show I actually adore, or stuff like that. It is very common if you see a queer character that's genderqueer specifically. I mean, there's obviously the bury your gays trope as well, but I think it's the spontaneity and the routineness of violence in media depictions of genderqueer people is incredibly pervasive. It's very much as if people cannot really imagine any other usefulness than our destruction. Sometimes
basically punching bags.
That's how,
and it gets quite wearisome, doesn't it? I mean, okay, in many incarnations of that, it is trying to explore that phenomena. Fair enough, but it does get wearisome, and it does have the alternate effect sometimes of, even if it's trying to explore the truth of that, it's also reinforcing it unintentionally.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a spectrum. I mean, I'm obviously deeply sympathetic to exploring the traumas and violences that we experience fictionally, and I'm very non-moralistic about art in general, as I know you are too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
I'd have trouble being otherwise, to be honest.
But given the kind of fiction I enjoy, in terms of horror stuff and the kind of fiction you write, indeed, that would be it would be very difficult for us not to have those views. But
that would be some cognitive dissonance and a half, wouldn't it? That would be a real problem.
Yes, yeah. But I think it's because there's a moralizing dimension to the depictions of genderqueer death. I think that bothers me more than just the fact of it. There are, obviously trans lives are inherently precarious, and there's a lot of violence. That's true more so with some trans people. Obviously, trans sex workers or black trans people experience a considerably larger amount. But like just going out, I mean, the 156% increase in hate crimes in the UK in the last 4 years. And like that's something I see routinely. Just going out and about in London. Lots of groups of young men will be shouting stuff. I've been pushed, spat at, but not actually managed to be hit, and stuff like that. Like it is like there is a story to tell there, and I think people need to tell those stories.
Definitely.
But the depiction is not neutral in that way. It's not, or even sympathetic. There tends to be a degree of enjoyment around the destruction of trans bodies. I think.
Yes, I think you're right. I think you're right. It's a similar thing that you often find with the destruction of women's bodies, right? So there's a traditional misogyny tied up, particularly within genre fiction. And it's not intentional a lot of the time. That's the most interesting thing. It's not something that the work or the creators are conscious of all the time. It's just part of the way, the historical coding. And it's massively problematic. It's very like anti-Semitic tropes, of course, and whatnot, which are so baked into so many of our discourses and our imagery that often we don't realize that we're using it.
No, because we have this sort of inherited language that we're in terms of narrative devices and fiction, it's very easy to replicate stuff unintentionally, but also because we're all playing within the same imaginary, in the same imaginary sphere as all of these deeper problems that are unaddressed. And I think it is it's a recurring thing. I mean, I think it's more in terms of analyzing it, like those tropes. I mean, I think it's more useful rather than moralizing the art to talk about what this stuff is processing and how that affects actual trans people. But like it is a pervasive dynamic, and I think there's a very I mean, I think with some of the anti-trans violence, some of the more high-profile stuff, Brianna Gay, obviously.
Of course.
But there was also a young girl who's alive, fortunately, but was stabbed 14 times in London.
Yes.
Often younger trans people, in fact. I mean, obviously they're easier targets, younger trans women. What we can see from what's being revealed in these cases, and especially the Brianna Gay case, where we learn a huge amount about the motivations, which still didn't stop some in the media trying to depict it as not being about transphobia under the most incredible pretexts.
Didn't you anticipate that? I knew that was going to happen. We saw it like 10 years earlier with Matthew Shepard, right?
Yes, exactly.
Exactly the same thing happening from exactly the same sources for exactly the same reasons. They will they will move heaven and earth to muddy the waters.
It's not particularly surprising that people who have been poisoning the public discourse against us don't want to own the logical consequence of doing that, because
of course the worst of it is they know what they're doing as well. They know that even people who are not necessarily transphobic or homophobic will give those lies credence because it sounds better on a cultural level, doesn't it? It makes them feel better. They don't have any responsibility for it then. Oh, it's not a hate crime. It's not because that person was of this minority or that minority. It's a drug deal gone wrong, or it's this or it's that, or it makes it more palatable somehow.
In the case of Brianna Gay, like some of the arguments, and I always feel if an argument is really badly made, if its reasoning is just tortuously poor, that's not because the person making it isn't capable of thinking. It's usually because they're not really making an argument. Yeah. They're telling themselves something. So the argument around Brianna Gay was like, well, they also plan to kill cis people, which is just like I mean, what do you even say to that? You could be.
What do you even say to the right?
If someone was like a racist and planned to kill a black person for expressly racial motives, but then also planned to kill a white person for non-racist motives, that doesn't erase the racist motives of their attempt, and so on and so forth. And of course, that also doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't make sense on any level. It's such
on any level.
But also, a more insidious thing was this idea that because the girl amongst the two was obsessed with Brianna Gay and obviously had some kind of, I mean, from what we saw, and it's hard to say specifically because these are actual people with complex drives and motives, but there seemed to be a sort of fetishistic interest there. That wasn't transphobic, because if like a fetishistic interest in trans people that results in murder is not transphobic, which really I think is deeply revealing in terms of the people that would write that, including people in The Guardian. I mean, like
just the cultural lack of understanding about these things, right? It's similar in its own peculiar way. It's similar to the lack of understanding around stalking, isn't it?
Yeah. No, there's a complete there's a dehumanization that's already baked in to how these things are discussed. Like it's prior to the actual discussion. That you can never really get at because it's prior, because it's presuppositional. And there's not much you can really say to it, but like it is morbidly fascinating that the way in which they will reason these things through, the way in which transphobes will
Oh, the knots they will tie themselves in. I mean, it's quite amazing. The way they immediately crystallized around their figureheads as well in a cultish manner. They all immediately flocked to J.K. Rowling and surrounded them in this sort of wall, this impenetrable wall of verbiage and garbage, trying to defend them, trying their damnedest to defend them and to deflect any responsibility. Responsibility at all.
Some of the imagery around J.K. Rowling amongst the TERFs is downright religious. It's cultish, It's very, very, it's very weird. I mean, again, you do feel, I guess it's sort of very prosaic, but you couldn't really parody some of this stuff. It's so excessive in its
bizarre.
Yeah.
It is flat out bizarre, especially when you just throw facts at them, like evident facts. When you tell them, yeah, she cozies up to misogynist fascists, which she has. I mean, you can throw the tweet at them
Oh, I've
where she's
seen
been, she's been
left-wing
cozying up to the
people.
likes of Matt Walsh and whatnot, and you're like, you do realize what Matt Walsh actually believes about women, don't you?
I mean,
He,
I've
he
seen left-wing
literally,
people outright defend it. I mean, so-called left-wing people, even defend, people who are more odious than Rowling, if that's possible, like Posey Parker. Who will defend Posey Parker's policy of working with anybody, which does mean working with actual fascist groups.
Actual fascists, right? Like actual. There is a reason why Nazis turn up to her rallies.
Yes,
it's not coincidence. It's not coincidence.
The way that the way that these people will concede all principle. I mean, it is for them existential. Erasing us is seen as vital to their survival in some very abstract, weird, half-baked, kind of only half-conscious sense. But they do consider our existence to be, an obscenity, and they will do everything
it's almost
they can.
like it's like they regard it as a principal evil, isn't it? That's the justification they give anyway. That somehow it's such a profound cultural ill that it's somehow going to cause the collapse of civilization or something. And it's such bullshit. I mean, it's such bullshit. We know it's bullshit because we have examples of countries where where there's been trans affirming care for decades. It has here.
It's also like, I don't even think those arguments work against. Well, they can't work against them, obviously, because of the presuppositional stuff. But I don't think because they will frame the stuff that's. It's kind of like if you don't think hitting a child is wrong, then you're not going to take it as evidence against hitting that.
Of course.
That the violence persists multi-generationally. Like this idea that it didn't do me any harm, but then you've gone on to hit your children, which I think is a harm.
Exactly.
Like you either think it's wrong or you don't. And if you take some transphobes, they will talk about consensual transition care as being the equivalent of Nazi experiments. This is stuff
and it's like. And then once again, you throw out them. Well, these over here are the actual Nazis and fascists who are on your side.
Yeah. There's no self-awareness.
There's no self-awareness at all. There's no it's not enough to keep the mind alive, is it? To quote Peter Cook, it's not enough to keep the mind alive. If you have any kind of clarity on the situation, you actually can't fathom that degree of cognitive dissonance. You can't see how it works. On the one hand, you will say that you identify actively as feminist. You are fighting to preserve some position of women within society. And on the other, you are actively cozying up to people who want women to be sex slaves and broodmares and then to die conveniently.
I mean, I think they do as well in an unfought way. I mean, you look at the rhetoric around trans men, and it's very much that kind of misogyny, right? They talk about lost fertility is a huge talking point.
Yes.
The
way they talk down to these people.
The
way they talk, they condescend to them in a very misogynistic way, because in the same way these people see trans women as men, they see trans mass as abused girls, right? That's what they think, isn't it? In their minds, that's what they think.
They can be pretty vicious as well. Like there's a kind of flip where a trans man will go from being a victim to being a self-hating, quote unquote woman, in their very warped way of thinking. And they they can be very vicious. I mean, look at the treatment of Elliot Page. Is it Elliot Page?
Page,
the bile that's thrown out. There's always this language of self-mutilation. I mean, they talk about that a little with trans femmes as well, and it's not like they never focus on fertility for us either. I mean, I think there's a weird sort of I say it's like fascism. Natalism is sort of baked in as well,
Yeah.
and there's that natalistic aspect that the point of human beings is to be breeding
It's just
vessels.
exactly just
Is
to
Yeah,
procreate endlessly, right?
yeah, exactly. Like the idea that somebody could damage their fertility for any reason, that there's anything higher than fertility, especially
Right.
for a woman, quote unquote, is anathema to them. They always talk about self mutilation is like a common thing. Like
Yeah.
it's a highly fascistic ideal of the body
Yeah.
that they're preserving. That there's a normal way of having a body that you have to exist within.
And
Um,
by extension, it's a prescription of behavior as well, isn't it? Which is
yeah,
highly misogynistic by its very
yeah,
nature.
yeah. And it's not particularly surprising that these people overlap into disableism quite regularly. Then, because they are so much about regulating and
Uh-huh.
controlling the parameters of the
Yeah,
normal. Like I think
that's it.
they're
Right. I think you've hit it right on the head there. When you talk about these parameters of the normal, that's it, isn't it?
yeah,
They
yeah,
want to preserve this dream, this fairy tale in their minds, this delusion of a normality of humanity,
yeah,
which
yeah.
relies, of course, it also relies upon them being ahistorical as well. They absolutely try to insist that none of this stuff existed when I was young or in the several decades ago, and it's like yeah, it did,
They
yeah, it
always
did,
pull the same trick, right? It's
yeah,
language. They because obviously trans consciousness isn't static, it's changed, and our
right,
self conceptions have changed. They'll
mhm,
use that, our evolving self conceptions, to say that there's something essentially new about us,
yes,
or that there's some break, that there was some of them, I wouldn't call them sophisticated, but maybe more rhetorically sort of fine grained. You see this a lot with a particularly nasty outfit called Spike, to a
mm,
former Marxists, I would say. I mean, they might
right,
claim to still be Marxists. Who knows? They're very weird. But that they talk a lot about how the historic transsexual movement was fine, but these transgender people,
oh
blah blah blah.
right,
And you see
yeah,
that a bit. Like there's a sort of, I mean, obviously within any kind of oppression, one of the one of the ways of enforcing that is to create a mythic category of the good
mhm.
trans,
Yes,
the trans
yes,
that,
of
yeah.
course. I mean, you see that in any revolutionary movement, don't you? You see it even with like feminists.
Mm,
You see certain subgroups of feminists these days who will talk about historical feminism as though it was very polite, and though
mm,
our ancestors didn't do this, they didn't cause a ruction or anything like that. And then, of course,
mm,
you look at the history of feminism, and you realise that actually
mm,
they were literally throwing fiery
yeah,
bottles through windows of politicians' houses, kidnapping politicians' children, and so
mm.
on and so forth. And it's like,
But
yeah, it's completely ahistorical.
it's insulting, obviously, to the people of the past, and as you say,
Yeah,
completely inaccurate. But it's also, I mean, it just is tipping your hat in terms of being a reactionary, right? Because you're literally saying that it is the progression of consciousness, the development of consciousness, that you have a problem with.
yeah,
I wouldn't deny for a second that trans consciousness has evolved. I think you read a lot of historical material, and there's a lot more essentialism about
mhm,
how we encapsulate ourselves. There's a lot more internal divisions and
mhm,
drawing boundaries and lines around ourselves in historical terms. That's
yeah,
understandable given the context
yeah, yeah.
and the need to emerge as a category. I mean, I also think there's a lot more overlap. Something I find really interesting increasingly is that within the early sort of sexuality minority movement, there's a lot of talk about gender. There's whole
Mhm.
categories of of um, of understanding gay men and gay women almost as a separate gender, but
Yeah.
almost sometimes as almost a kind of almost mythic species apart,
Yes.
often in quite utopian terms. There's a sort of Uranian stuff, and obviously, like that stuff is all like caught up in sort of 19th century ideas of essentialism and biology that we would all reject. But when people like that talk about their gendered experiences, they don't tend to be taken particularly seriously now, even by queer theorists sometimes. Like for example, there's a lot of that talk within Proust about how he relates to homosexuality in these very gendered terms. And obviously there's like these quite consistent sapphic themes throughout Proust's literature, which are always generally interpreted as Proust trying to talk about gay men in ways that won't be censored. But that just strikes me as an absurd way to interpret the text, partly because it's entirely speculative. There's no basis for thinking that, but also partly because Proust does talk about gay men. He's got, almost like sort of sadomasochistic scenes with gay men in Search of Lost Time. So he's clearly not particularly that concerned with the thought of being censored. Otherwise, he wouldn't do that.
Exactly.
I just think it's I think I'm very strongly there for calling In Search of Lost Time, which is one of my favorite pieces of literature, sapphic as well as various other things, and I think there is a genuine sapphic dimension to that text, and I think his relationship to gender is much more complicated than even a lot of queer theorist readings of Proust tend to suggest. I think we tend to simplify the past in all kinds of ways, and to erase these nuances and subtleties between these, because none of these things are exactly defined in the sort of hard and fast way that we imagine, even in terms
of course not, or even particularly well documented, of course, because queer people in general are one of those minorities where much of our history exists in fiction, right? It exists in fiction and not in documentary.
And our self-conceptions are so defined against the oppressions that we experience. These are we're not allowed to just flourish on our own terms, even today. So, we have to interpret any kind of identity within that framework. Like, these things don't exist separate to the broader sets of relations and power dynamics that are ongoing.
It does get wearisome, doesn't it? It does get wearisome that you have to operate witin that tension, but you do. It's just essential, right? It's essential at the moment. On a survivalist level, we have to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like it's also just not even always conscious. Like you exist in that tapestry, and like that's just a fact of you. Like it's very easy to get into quite dark places of resenting it and stuff. And like queer lives, by and large, I think we tend to have very fractured lives where we don't have that same sense of continuity that is afforded to non-queer people quite often.
Absolutely, because the narratives don't apply to us, right?
Exactly.
The meta-narratives just don't exist for us in the same way they do for our straight siblings.
And also, because we have to constantly rediscover ourselves, I think our lives tend to be defined by these massive breaks of self-revelation. I think, again, it's sort of, it's multi-dimensional. Like, I think people, the coming out narrative, I think is obviously quite a simplified one. And I think most queer people experience various levels of coming out and of self-discovery. I mean, certainly during transition. I mean, even if you go into to transition with one sexuality and you maintain that throughout, your relationship to that sexuality is definitely going to alter, and that is true, I'm sure, even for ace people as well. The way that you conceive yourself in the world and the way that you relate to something like that. So it's multiple revelations, and I'm sure that's also true for cis LGBT people. And like all of these dimensions, these complexities are what are erased from this sort of broader transphobic discussion. I mean, on the subject of like transsexuality, like the way that we're caricatured is so absurdly inaccurate. Like it's
Absolutely,
you know
it's
like
cartoonish, and it's always from like a heteronormative perspective,
yes.
as an artifact of heteronormative either desire or disgust, usually, right?
Yeah, which are obviously interwoven with each other anyway. I think
Yes,
wherever there's
it,
like intense disgust, there's
mm,
usually subordinated desires.
yeah,
Quite, yeah. Um,
often expressing at the same time. It's really very, very complex indeed.
yeah, absolutely. Like there's repression. Like I mean, I'm not, I have my criticisms of Freud, but
Mhm,
I do actually have a lot of time for Freud as well, and like
mhm.
you know, the the buried repressed will always return. You always have that
Always,
return of the repressed, and like
yeah.
that's a huge dynamic in all of this. Like there's, I guess, the imaginary around us really exposes, I think, the strangeness of cis hetero life. Like it's
Mhm.
actually a yeah. I mean, I guess strange precisely because it doesn't go through these revelatory moments. It doesn't have that, and I think there is like sometimes even a degree of envy um, for queer people creating our
I
own
think
senses and
so.
rituals around that stuff. Like I
I
think
think
there's a
so,
degree,
and the identities that result.
yeah, yeah. I mean, actually having rituals that help develop and cultivate a sense of self, which,
Mhm.
as mentioned earlier, is something I think that is broadly lacking in modernity. It's something modernity tends to push against over
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
It tends to erode. I think we exist in a very ritualistically impoverished way.
Mhm.
And that has so many sort of multi-dimensional effects. I mean, I think part of it is also like because we still do need rituals as a species, so we still reach for
Yeah.
them instinctively. But I think often without uh, a sense of ownership over that, and also a sense of
Yeah.
playfulness with it. The
Mhm.
ritual is something that is effectively playful.
Yeah. It's
That
almost pantomimic.
Yeah, exactly. It's the way that we symbolically engage in the world and give it meaning, and that's something we start doing as children, and then
Mhm.
in
Then
our
we're shamed out
society.
of it. We're
Yeah,
shamed out of it, aren't we? We're shamed out of playing and using our imaginations and investing the world with poetry, as though
exactly.
it's infantile, as though it's something that we don't do, and it kills us.
Yeah,
It kills
yeah.
us in so many fundamental ways.
No, I think it is a spiritual death to lose that ability to play effectively. I
Mm,
mean, I don't
yeah.
think like it's and or to subsume it into very narrow parameters. That sort of I think quite dead and rituals that we are allowed,
Mhm.
as mentioned earlier, are often to facilitate productivity and
Mhm.
normality anyway. But
Mhm. But
also,
they're
like,
always flourished with that sense of postmodern irony as well, aren't they? As though they're not even real. You know,
yeah, yeah,
we can't even allow that because it's too much, right? We can't
mm,
even allow that. So let alone the more profound revelatory stuff or the transgressive stuff that will open us up to ourselves and to the world at large.
mm, absolutely. I mean, there's a meme going around and it's quite funny there's a picture of I think a Catholic priest, and it's saying. Man denies that more than two genders can exist, who also believes that Jesus can be a biscuit. But like, in some ways, like I kind of like I want to sort of take that on even more. Like I actually really enjoyed the upset that Transvisibility Day falling on Easter caused.
Oh
Not
God, yeah.
least because like
Well,
the symbolic resonances there are
right.
actually quite
Who
powerful and
understands like dying and being born again better?
yeah,
Who
I mean
understands
resurrection
resurrection
is
better on a metaphorical level, on a symbolic level, right?
and I'm certainly not and will never be a Christian. I think Trinitarianism is a logical step too far for me. It's um, but I mean, I guess I'm a Hegelian, so I demand reason. I just think Hegel abandoned it when it came to his own Christianity to some extent. I have sympathy for a lot of Christians. Progressive Christians I have a lot of time for. But the message of the resurrection, I think, is quite life affirming and profound, and I have enormous respect and resonance with that mythology as someone who was brought up Anglican, and in a background where liberal Anglicanism, but it took it seriously. I mean, there's a lot of Anglicanism that I think is just sort of a social club, but
pretty much.
But actually did take it seriously, and so like these things were very live ideas for me growing up. And I think that, I think there's profound resonances there, and it is such a waste of that mythology and that spirituality, to be resentful of an oppressed group for having the temerity to announce itself on one of your holy days. It's again, it's that miserly nasty attitude that's expressed in
somehow this is mine, somehow we own this belongs to us, and it's like, no, it's a day. It's a day. It doesn't belong to anyone any more than the metaphysics you proclaim to hold belongs to you at all. It doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to everyone.
That whole notion of possessing, I think, it's fascinating, and you can really see the erosion of Christianity into Christendom, the sort of the national cult of Christianity when it behaves like that, when people who claim to believe in things like revelation and
I don't know how you can. I don't know how. For me, it doesn't make any sense. If you genuinely believe in this metaphysics, I don't see how you can be so Picayune. I don't know how you can obsess about small things, right?
There's nothing celebratory or life-affirming left in such a faith. It becomes essentially a death cult.
I always look at how I would react if I believed there was something analogous to a god, which was a prime mover that could reshape reality according to its whims. Then no one would ever see me again. I certainly wouldn't give two shits about things like earning a living and buying a house. So what I'd be in the desert somewhere.
I mean, especially if I was a Christian, I think I would take that altogether a lot more seriously.
I wouldn't even care. Like if it existed in some way, shape, or form, I'd want to commune with it one way or the other.
Christianity in its actual historical forms and in those people who do take it seriously does make those kinds of excessive demands and should, if it's to be believed.
If it's to be believed, then that's where you should be, right?
That's
where you should be. Why would you care about material stuff? Why would you care about Picayune stuff like a family or having children? What would that even mean?
I mean, I'm always quite like a ruthless pragmatist about things. I don't trust beliefs that don't alter people's behavior. If you have a belief that isn't changing how you behave, then I think that belief is meaningless at best.
Exactly, and it's not a real belief, is it? It's not a sincere belief. What it is a kind of masquerade. It's a kind of pantomime. You're saying that you believe in this as a lifestyle choice in a very materialist, postmodern way. It's like what type of cereal you get, or what brand of dress you wear, or whatever. It doesn't mean anything.
Exactly. Yeah. And when it comes to the things, and I think even the focus on belief is a little alienated, to be honest. I think I don't think the pre-moderns really obsess so much over the lines and demarcations of their beliefs in the way that we do. I think the way that we exist more holistically, the way that we exist in the world is a far more important. So, I mean, in terms of my own spirituality, I'm very sympathetic to those kinds of traditions. I mean, I'd probably describe myself as a pantheist in broad terms. I think I do have a sense of the divine, but it's not separate to everything else, because I don't think anything is separate to everything else. I think that there's probably a kind of ground of being. I mean, I guess in that sense, definitely Hegelian, but but that actually does have meaning for me. It has meaning in terms of the way that I look and understand the world. I think a kind of, what you philosophically describe as radical monism, that there is only really one thing, that there's only really one substance, that that everything is interconnected, really does inform my own personal sense of reverence and engagement with the world, and a capacity to hope and stuff. I'd be really wary if I found a sort of stray belief in my sort of wardrobe of convictions or whatever. Metaphor's running away, but like that just doing nothing. It was just sort of sat there redundantly. I think that was odd, and I think like most
thing. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, most reactionaries, it does feel, and most people in general, I think, maybe in a deeply alienated society, will tend to have a huge number of like beliefs that they are protective of, that don't alter the parameters of their lives at all.
That don't affect their behavior in any particular way. That don't affect the way they operate in the world. And in that regard, we're alienated from ourselves. We don't know what we are. We haven't been given the tools to construct our identities. And we don't understand what belief is fundamentally. Of course, belief is visceral. You don't decide to have it.
Yeah.
You don't go down the supermarket aisle and pick, there's the brand of belief I'm going to have. Exactly.
There's a lack of any sense of the somatic, the embodied in the way that people engage with the world and themselves, and that I think is just alienation. I mean, I think alienation is, one of the things I find difficult with a lot of the radical left is that I think the one of the most important parts of Marx's diagnoses of modern capitalism is his critique of alienation.
Yes.
And decentering that, or making it a sort of secondary thing, a sort of like, this is just like a kind of bad headache caused by capitalism. I get very wary of that. Like we are in a deeply alienated period. We're not, moralistically in a worse period, because that's not how history works.
Right.
I think to talk in those glib terms doesn't really make much sense at the end of the day. But that we are in a deeply alienated period of human history, and that has profound ramifications. And I agree completely. Like, belief is embodied. Belief is it's the rituals you do every day. That's what you believe.
And it's what you feel, isn't it? It's what you feel. It's what inspires. It's what drives. And it's very hard to define in that regard, because it does sort of come from the guts and the heart.
Because it permeates, because it's not something that, this is sort of, I think, quite dualistic, quite in that sense non-modest way of seeing beliefs as like this sort of set of abstract floating ideas that don't really interact with the world particularly much. And I think that
you wear like jewelry.
I think that
the internet probably hasn't helped in that regard. The internet probably hasn't helped in that regard, where everything is presentation.
I think we tend to create tools that further alienate us, because we create tools out of our own alienation. So the problem with all technology is that that we tend to create technology that's going to cater to our alienation. And the internet is a resplendent example of that. I mean, I think there's inherent utopian potentiality within the internet that obviously like the creators of the internet were very aware of and led with. But its interactions with capitalism do just mean that Web 2.0 and all of the horrors of it just become inevitable over time. That there's no real way to salvage the internet from that, because there's no other way than the kinds of ways that Web 2.0 has managed to do it, to monetize the internet.
That's it.
And I think it's a particularly ugly sphere now, but like it obviously still has that utopian potential.
Absolutely, and there are pockets of it there. There are pockets of it there still. There's still wonderful interactions. There are still wonderful creative communities and revolutionary communities out there.
And also, even in terms of queerness, I think one of the great difficulties that queer people have always had, and this is why we tend to be urban, is that we're, unlike, say, racially oppressed groups who are obviously going to be concentrated just by the very nature of that category, that oppression. Queer people will occur randomly, but rarely throughout the general population. So we tend to be very atomized, and the smallest of queer people, the smallest groups of queer people, like trans people,
yes, of course,
tend to be absurdly atomized. I think there is the internet creates the capacity for trans consciousness, while at the same time situating us in probably one of the most anti-trans spheres.
Yes,
so that
it's a very,
yeah,
very double-edged sword, isn't it? Very double-edged in that regard.
Exactly. So, like, so many trans people find and discover their transness in the very places where they receive the most abuse, and on social media and stuff. And like, the internet is just a cesspit for that stuff. I mean, some of the stuff I get in private messages,
I can
you get thick-skinned about it, but like, it is obscene. I mean, I get kind of morbidly humorous about it. Someone sent me an instruction manual on how to put together a suicide kit, and my first thought was that it was an incredibly amateurish job. They're not particularly witty individuals.
They're not particularly inventive either, or imaginative. They've sacrificed that. So,
yes, exactly. I mean, they all say the same things as each other. I mean,
it's all the same bullshit. It's always the same rhetoric, and you just get tired of it, don't you? It's just more. It doesn't have like I don't know whether they genuinely think it's going to have the dagger in the heart effect, but it just doesn't. It's so blunt.
No, I mean, the thing is, you get inured to it, right? I mean, it's like, you got your sort of standard set of dog whistles. The most common one I see is 41%, which is a reference to a 2011 study of trans suicidality in young people. I mean, it's crass and vulgar and disgusting, and tells you most of what you need to know about them. But they often get it wrong. So you often get people who will like throw around like 43, 40, blah blah. So they can't even remember their own dog whistles.
And can't understand that it is once again that core narrative for our time. It's the emperor's new clothes. They are demonstrating what they are.
Exactly.
It's like, what do you want? What are you trying to do? Do you want me to align with you when you're being so foul?
I mean, they do that mostly to trans people, and obviously they've got like this whole. I mean, the more fascistic elements especially have this whole thing of trying to encourage trans people to take their lives. Like, that's a very common, and like, that's why they'll often like go on the internet and they'll do a lot of like quite vulgar art around trying to like activate or play into gender dysphoria. They'll do that quite a lot, but it's very boring.
It's when you refuse to engage with them, that's when it's hilarious, because they hate that.
Oh yeah,
they hate, because there's obviously a narcissism inherent, right? There's a narcissism inherent.
Yeah,
and they hate it. They absolutely hate it. Like, I refuse these days. I flat out refuse. So I do just tell them to fuck off. In no uncertain terms, I just tell them to fuck off. And what you usually get back is something like, "Well, that's very convincing." I was like, Is there some misunderstanding? Is there some miscommunication? I am not talking to you. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I don't want to talk to you, and I don't want you on my side, as it were. I am telling you to fuck off.
I mean, there's that like strange desire, like warped desire for play there. Like, they are very infantile. They are trying to get a rise out of some kind of symbolic parental figure. I feel like I don't think that's actually. I mean, it sounds like a very vulgar analysis, but it's very hard to encounter these people and see the way they behave and not feel that that's the case.
It does feel that way, doesn't it? It feels like they really want you to argue with them. They want you to engage with them. And also, they want it on their terms. It's just like the homophobes. It's just like the homophobes and the racists. They want it on their terms. They want to prescribe the parameters of argument. And if you refuse to engage with that, they hate it.
Yeah, that's when they throw it. I mean, there's these people spend their lives doing this. They go on like raids to Facebook groups owned by trans people, where they'll like mass pile on and stuff like that.
Like,
I mean, imagine having that kind of time in your life to
well,
devote.
this is the other thing, right? This is the other thing. Get a fucking life.
Well, yes, that
That's
would
a
be
life.
yeah. It
That's
is
a life.
astonishing. I mean, that goes back to the thing of obsession, right? That like
It's the Graham Linehan
yeah,
syndrome, isn't it? It's the
yes,
sacrifice everything,
yeah, and
everything.
almost wear that like really actually like he seems oddly proud of how
He's
much he's
unwell.
lost.
I
Like,
mean, it's not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not apologizing for him at all. He's a piece of shit, but he's unwell.
oh,
There
he's a
is
deeply
something wrong with him.
yeah. No,
You
he's a
know,
deeply disturbed person,
there is
clearly.
something. So, I mean, to be able not to be able to see, you've lost everything to
Mm.
this. I mean, everything, and the way he behaves as well. Did you see when he was banned from Twitter and he made a sock account to troll Neil Gaiman because
Yeah,
Neil is
yeah,
very, very like trans affirming, and Neil was like, yeah, Graham, I know it's you. I
yeah.
recognize your writing. I know it's you. What is wrong with you? You know,
It is just completely bizarre. Like his behavior, especially,
and
is
that's
just
what they've made their saint. That's one of the ones they've made their icons and mouthpieces. I am telling you, something is going to come out about him. I don't
no.
know
I wouldn't
what,
be surprised. I
but
wouldn't be
there is
surprised at
something.
all.
Nobody is that extreme. Nobody is that extreme without there being something in their lives. And
Mm,
he has no contact. I mean, zero contact with his wife and daughter, his ex-wife and daughter. That's
that's
strange.
yeah, yeah.
That's
No,
really strange. Even in situations like where there's been a divorce and where even when it's been acrimonious, for there to be no contact
no.
is
He is
very
deeply
strange.
yeah. He is a deeply disturbed person. I mean, I mean they all are, but like I think he is an extreme case, especially for amongst the celebrity trans
Yeah,
folks. I mean, a lot of
very.
them are just mediocre. I mean, like Helen
Yeah.
Joyce is one of the most incredibly mediocre people in
Oh, yeah.
existence.
Very dull.
Um,
Very,
like,
very tedious, dull.
yeah, yeah,
There's no argument there at all. There is
yeah.
nothing you can't run rings around. You don't even
There's
need any
nothing.
specialist information with Helen Joyce. Her statements and arguments are just bad. They're just very bad.
The only difficulty is there's so little of any substance to grab hold of.
That's
It
right.
feels like you don't really have much to argue with.
No,
She doesn't actually deal very much in arguments.
no,
Occasionally she'll deal in half truths or outright lies.
outright
A
lies,
lot of
which
the
she's called
times
for immediately, of course.
it's
Yeah,
just invective.
immediately.
Like a lot of times it's just invective. Like
Yeah,
like obviously calling trans people names is not an
yeah.
argument, so there's not
No,
really much to say back to it.
no.
Um, but
Sad
yeah,
old
I mean,
woman, that helps. That's what I tend
she
to call her. But
she is deeply sad. I think. I mean,
yeah,
she's
that's it.
just
It's sad
yeah,
more than
yeah.
anything, isn't it? It's sad.
I
It's
mean,
like
these.
there is an element of, I think you brought it up earlier, of envy of trans joy, right?
I
There
think
is
so.
elements of that, isn't there?
I think there's a degree of there's a real. I mean, I think there's always been this thing of if you do exist outside the prescriptions, it challenges people's own choices. You know, if
Mhm.
you do something that's different, and
Yeah.
it's absolutely not the same, obviously, because it's not an oppression. But even as somebody who is home educated, I encountered this sometimes that some people would be inordinately offended by the fact of my being home educated,
Mhm.
because I think they've experienced that as a challenge to the choices that they've made, either having gone to school or sending their own children to school.
Yep.
And they became very defensive. And I'm not in any way, I don't wax lyrical about home education. I think that
Mhm.
there's a lot of complexities, and there's no ideal in the current system. I think I'm very pro people having the ability to do that, but there are definitely trickier issues that have to be navigated
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of but like the lack of any real engagement with the actual lives of home educators and a very visceral
Mm.
dislike, and like obviously again totally different scale with being trans, like because there you're not just challenging like individual choices people have made, but it comes to people's fundamental sense of their embodied selves. And so
Yes.
your existence becomes I've used the term already, but like an obscenity. Like I think some people genuinely do experience the existence of trans people as a kind of body horror, as a kind of like visceral body horror. That it that you know that their own that their the integrity of their own bodies actually comes under threat. That people could exist so differently to them.
Yeah. And
And
it's, I mean, you've read my work. You know what I think about like being static on the bone. It's like so bizarre to me.
It is. I
bizarre.
I think the ability to. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, the ability to alter yourself and the things that. I mean, like I really don't get how people. I mean, even in general, sort of cis apathy rather than transphobia, because I think there's a whole other thing there. But like, how people can't be even slightly amazed by it. I mean, I think the things that hormones can do and the things that surgeries can do are incredible, and there's a poetry to it, and there's a transcendence to it.
It's not a purely like in terms of aesthetic, like the variety that it allows for in humanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's actually, I mean, not to drag it back to one of my pet obsessions, but there's a line in Hannibal, in one of the episodes of Hannibal, where there's a serial killer who's making a color palette of
oh yeah, I remember that. Yes.
And Hannibal has this wonderful line, because of course he would see it this way. He says the colors of our skins are so often politicized. It's so refreshing to see someone view it in terms of the pure aesthetic and revel in the variety. And
he's such a great Blakean villain, like
isn't he just? Because it's like you hear lines like that and you're like, yes, yeah, that's beautiful, that's wonderful, right? I mean, you have to, as he says, as he acknowledges, you have to ignore history.
I mean, there's a sense all the way through Hannibal of him being a kind of demiurgic figure, like he's not
entirely human, right?
Exactly. I mean, you get this sense in a lot of literature and film with certain kinds of characters. I think one of the ones that does it really well is No Country for Old Men, where the sociopathic character, Sugar or something like that, I'm probably mispronouncing the name, but he's clearly not human or real in exactly a normal sense. Like, and there's a scene where he and the cop coincide in the same place and don't seem to encounter each other. This happens in both the book and the film. It's handled very deftly in both, actually. I mean, it's a really good film. And Cormac McCarthy is such a great writer. And they don't encounter each other because they don't actually exist in the same reality. This demiurgic figure doesn't exist for people like that character who exists in a completely separate. I mean, it's in the title, No Country for Old Men. He's literally not in that same reality. I mean, that's even more brazen with like the villain of Blood Meridian, the judge, who is just demonic. Like he's got capacities and abilities. Right. Yeah, exactly. But I really like that trip, and that's definitely there in Hannibal. Like, Hannibal isn't just a human being.
No,
right? It's just not plausible.
Nobody is in that particular show. There are very few actual straight human beings who are not in some way
into it more and more, right? Like, one of my criticisms of season 1 is that they play off this whole like. It's the one thing I find slightly annoying about the show, that they play into this whole like idea of. Who's the main character? I forget his name now.
Will Graham.
Will Graham. Yeah, having this sort of like weird neurodevelopmental issue, I guess neurodivergence, which is kind of like it's too rigorously defined in the early season. They talk about it being like halfway between sociopathy and autism, which is really weird because that's not sociopathy and autism aren't even related to each other. One is a personality disorder. And
jettison it later on.
Yeah,
in fact,
they just stop talking about that.
They even explicitly at one point state that you can't define him. It's fruitless to try and define him.
Exactly. Yeah,
and it's sort of implicit in the show as well. It's implicit in the show because Hannibal wouldn't be interested in him if that were the case.
Yeah, if he just had like a strange pathology, if he just had a
Yeah,
rare pathology,
uh,
that's
that's not
yeah,
interesting insofar as Hannibal is concerned. The reason he loves Will, and he absolutely loves Will, is because he is art. He's this moving human art. He's something completely abstract.
yeah,
Uh, you
yeah,
know, that he can't entirely comprehend. And which threatens him to a certain degree, which he likes. He's this odd character in that regard. He likes being challenged and threatened, and for things to upset his sense of self, because it doesn't happen very often.
I mean, a good thing in season one is it plays directly on that. And when we first encounter Hannibal, he's bored.
Yeah,
He's been bored for a very long time.
that's exactly it.
Um,
He's bored. Yeah, he is, and
yeah,
so is Will. By the way, so is Will. Will is
yeah,
bored of humanity as well.
yes,
Um,
no,
and
absolutely,
it's that wonderful cross pollination between the two of them.
yeah,
Where they basically merge. They become a singular entity, which is really played out in season two.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, Will is never the moral exemplar that he pretends to be.
uh,
That's definitely
and
like
unless a show wouldn't know that, it wouldn't acknowledge that. It would, but this show does. It absolutely goes for it.
oh yeah. I mean, by the end, Will is as morally compromised
Oh,
as Hannibal in
yeah.
many ways.
By the
Like,
end, it's a flat. I mean, I love the fact they go there. That they go for the romance in final acts.
oh yeah,
I that
absolutely.
just
Yeah.
did for me. I was. I mean, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. That final scene is erotic. It is
Oh yeah.
just
Yeah.
the most erotic thing. Just fell off my chair.
No,
Um,
it's explicit. I mean, like you get that a lot in a way that's unacknowledged. I mean, you get it a huge amount in anime, which is something I'm
yes.
very fond of. I always joke about like the ending of Naruto Shippuden. Of course, they've got this tortured thing between Sasuke and Naruto all the way
Yes.
through, and they end up sort of ripping each other's arms off and then just collapsing beside each other. I mean, it's just absurd, like the degree to which them two fighting is just a metaphor for sex. It's just
Sex.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, like this. I mean, literal explosions
Hmm.
and it's very embodied. It's very over the top. I mean, in the
It's an
way
odd
that
thing,
that
isn't
kind of
anime in that regard? Like
oh yeah,
there's that tentativeness, and then there's the anime that just goes for it. There's the sub versions of anime that just are overtly homosexual.
oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's
I mean, there's
really
lots of
interesting.
like more like sophisticated, intelligent animes will often tend to have like really no holds bars in terms of like the content. I mean, my favorite anime ever, Text No Lies, is deeply dark and
Yeah,
has some pretty. There are subplots of that even I struggle with
yeah.
around sexual abuse and stuff.
Mhm.
But I mean, that show is astonishingly good and singularly beautiful. I have a fondness for the last and first episodes, especially. The first episode has only one line of dialogue in the whole 20 minutes. It's otherwise just an exploration of this world. You see the different characters just moving around and operating. Um, and that's how you kind of get to know this very strange sort of post-apocalyptic underground society.
Interesting.
And it's really slow and ponderous and very aesthetic.
Mhm.
Um, and then the last episode is really just like one of the most poignant and heartbreaking things. Like it's incredible. Um, but the whole show has like it doesn't like when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to violence, it doesn't hold anything back. I mean, even shows as mainstream as Naruto are much
Yeah.
more explicit than anything that like would be produced in sort of European or American
Yeah, I mean, it
cartoons.
is changing. We are have. I mean, there is a. I mean, like cartoons is one of the areas where sort of like the queer revolution has been happening of late, hasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many like queer affirming cartoons out there, aimed at young people, at children,
Mm.
um, which is really wonderful. I mean, obviously, we've had things like Steven Universe, which is kind of
Yeah.
the one that people hold up. There's Adventure Time,
Yes.
which is beautiful. I mean, my God, that
Yeah.
wow.
No, I mean that the explorations of queerness in Adventure Time are actually really sophisticated and like a level like I mean
just
there are other
unbelievable.
shows
I
that
mean,
have
you've got the full spectrum in Adventure Time as well. You have NB people, you have so many. There are ace characters. It's brilliant. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant.
no, it's really good. I think there's a lot more. If I felt envy for anything, it would be that sort of cultural richness that is available now is just.
Oh God,
I mean,
compared to when
yeah,
like we were kids, Jesus.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean, depictions of trans people when I was a kid were, I
oh
mean,
my God,
no doubt
like,
part of why it took me so long to come out.
yeah,
Like,
I mean, and gay people when I was a kid. I
oh
mean,
yeah,
Jesus
yeah,
Christ, can you
yeah.
imagine? I mean, like, it just didn't happen. It didn't.
No.
Well, it did, but they were
Or
coded
yeah,
as villains half the time, and you
villains
know,
or caricatures
or
as sort
caricatures.
of like
Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
I mean,
Oh well,
I
Rowan, I'm
joke
gonna
like
have to cut this short if that's okay.
that's absolutely fine. Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. But what I would like to do is carry on, maybe in a follow-up episode.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
That's okay.
yeah. I mean, it's easy to go on Skype. So yeah,
Brilliant,
yeah. We're
brilliant.
good
Well,
to talk more about Fallout as well. It's
yeah, I'd love
yeah,
to. I'd
yeah.
absolutely love to, and more about cartoons and things.
Yes, definitely.
Excellent,
Cool.
fabulous.
Uh,
Well, before we go, is there anything that you'd like to pimp out?
I'll probably just push the anti-capitalist resistance website. If you look up that,
Yeah, I
I've
don't
usually
need to look
got
it up. It's down below. I'm going to put the links all down below.
fantastic. And maybe my own website, Rowan Tree Editing, especially if you need any editing doing. I'll
Yeah,
eventually get the blog back going. But yes,
excellent. For those of you who don't know, Rowan edited Essential Atrocities, my short story collection. Did a great job of that. Made it more than what it would otherwise have been. So thank you so much for that.
that's really good to hear. Thank you.
Oh, really, really, it helped a great deal. It really did. As for myself, guys, as per usual, you can find me knocking about here on Exaggerated Elegy. Lots of video game let's plays, as we discussed. Hannibal Digested is back. Lots of other stuff. I'm picking up my series with Kit very soon on the Books of Blood. That's going to be fun. Over on the Our Lives in Horror channel, the alternative channel, there's a couple of chats going up there very soon. Once again, if you go over to Arrow, I bet people on this channel are sick of hearing this, but if you go over to Arrow Films, you will find the new Hellraiser UHD and Blu-ray box sets, and Kit and I feature on the Hellbound disc on featurette Hell is What They Wanted. It's an hour and 40-minute chat about Hellraiser and Clive Barker and queerness and representation in horror and all that kind of thing. And we're really proud of that. Over at the Ginger Nuts of Horror, you will find the My Life in Horror series, which I inherited from Kit. And there's a couple of articles going up there very soon. One on When the Wind Blows by Raymond Brigg, and one about Bloodborne, since it was the 9th anniversary of Bloodborne recently. 9 years of the hunt, 9 years of the dream. I mean, I can't believe that. Quite frankly, I cannot believe that.
As poor PC gamers still haven't had the pleasure.
I'm so sorry. Because it is, even I love Elden Ring to bits, but I still think Bloodborne's my favorite.
I suspect it will be mine if it ever does come out on PC.
They should have done it by now. They should have let it. I know it's been the massive exclusive for Sony, but they should just let it go. Let people on the Xbox have it. Let people on the PC have it. Come on.
I can see why Sony are holding on to it, because even I have considered buying just for that one game, which is
it's
kind
still
of huge. In a way,
it's still huge. I mean, the FromSoft games, the communities tend to die off after a while. So like the Dark Souls community tends, but the Bloodborne community just keeps coming back and coming back and coming back and coming back again and again. I've got 4 Let's Plays of it on my channel. So
I think I've seen 3 of them. Yeah.
And there'll be another one this year. It's become an annual thing. Later on in the year, when the Return to Yharnam event happens, when everyone gets back on it, it'll probably start up again. because I can't
But
help it. It's the most brilliant place to be. Love Yarnum.
visually, it's beautiful. Like one of my favorite sort of fantastical artists is Lord Biksinski, and the style of it reminds me so much of
Very much.
Biksinski. It feels like
Very
that.
much.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. In the
definitely.
same way that you played another game that was more like who's the alien illustrator? Geiger.
Oh, yes, Scorn. That would have been Scorn.
Yeah, yeah. I love the ending of that. It's
so much.
yeah.
You
I mean, the
know,
fact that it ends in like such a pathetic way with this sort of like potential of transcendence denied to you is just that's incredible.
And it's just there.
Yeah,
it's just there. You've gone through so much, and it's just there.
And it encapsulates the whole game. It's quite brilliant. That game was not well reviewed, and I think people missed the point of it completely.
I think so too. I really do. It is not. Yeah, I totally disagreed with what the primary criticisms that are aimed at the game. It's like, no, that's part of the game. That's part of the experience. But apart from that, I think that's it from me, Rowan. Thank you once again. It's always
thank you.
Job.
Likewise.
Always. And when we come back, guys, more. Until then, bye.
Bye.